Alexandria Ocasio Cortez in New York City yesterday. She's being interviewed by Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's written a book that was a massive bestseller where he sees racism everywhere, Mr. Producer. White privilege everywhere. And so he interviews her. So I say she will not come on my program. But let's listen. Cut 6. This is from yesterday. Go.
When we talk about this conversation on marginal tax rates, it's an economic question, but it's also a moral question. It is the policy translation of a proposed answer to what kind of society do we want to live in. Are we comfortable with a society where someone can have a personal helipad while this city is experiencing the highest rates of people experiencing homelessness?
All right, stop. See, this is the problem. Somebody can have a helipad, and then we're experiencing homelessness. Now, if somebody doesn't have a helipad, will that reduce the homelessness rate? If somebody does have a helipad, will that increase the homelessness rate? There's no connection whatsoever. If you have $50,000 and the person down the street doesn't, if your $50,000 is taken from you, how does that help the person down the street? Or even if it's not taken from you, if you lose it, bad investment, how does that help the person down the street? A homelessness rate and somebody has a helipad. Now, we can get into the weeds a little bit here. Maybe we should. That means the person has a helicopter. She's taking a shot at Bloomberg, who she knows is going to run. I don't care for the man, but that's beside the point. He's got a helicopter. Maybe it's 20 of them. Why do I care? Does she know how a helicopter comes into existence, that it has to be manufactured? Does she know who manufactures helicopters? Hardworking, blue-collar, middle-class Americans? Does she know who the mechanics are on helicopters? Hardworking, blue-collar, middle-class Americans? These things create jobs. Redistribution of wealth does not create a job. It may create a temporary job, but it doesn't create permanent jobs. It's the government stepping in and deciding what happens. And wherever that happens, you have inefficiencies, you have poverty, and you have a building police state. And nobody ever asked this question. Where in the Constitution does the government have the power to do these things? Nowhere. That's how far we've dropped, we've fallen from constitutional republicanism. I mean, the revolution, really what triggered the revolution, there were a number of things built up and so forth, but it was the Stamp Act more than anything else in 1775. A tax on paper, which meant newspapers, which meant on any piece of paper and all, and pamphlets and so forth. The Stamp Act. What do you think the revolutionaries, 1774, 5, 6, and so forth, what do you think they would say about this? Absolute monarchy, tyranny, just in a different form. Jefferson used to talk about tyranny, and one of the things he would say, among others, is you can have legislative tyranny. That is tyranny by a legislature. Doesn't have to be a king. Doesn't have to be a group of people. It can be an elected legislature. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, we're not a small d democracy. We're not a populist nation. We're a republic. We're constitutionalists. People read these polls on TV, particularly of the left, and they say, see, there's a majority of Americans who believe that the 70% tax rate should be applied to this. That's not the test. They're private property rights. Somebody has a helipad, and we are experiencing homelessness as bad as since the Great Depression. Well, of course, she's a liar. And one of the ways you reduce it, by the way, is securing your border so the poorest of the poor aren't pouring into your country and moving into our cities. But they don't want to hear that. They don't want to. The population is changing. There's millions and millions of foreigners here who are here illegally, who are in the quote-unquote shadows. And so it's a heavy economic drag on a city, on a community, on a state. But you're not allowed to talk about that. So that person who has a helipad and a helicopter, they're not taking anything from anybody. In fact, they're creating jobs. And that person who has a helicopter may be an individual who employs 5, 10, 20,000 people, all of whom have families, all of whom are fed, all of whom pay taxes. So what's wrong with that? Go ahead.
Should those two things coexist at the same time?
Should those two things coexist at the same time? This is a police state fascistic mentality. And that's where they have to go, the Democratic Socialists, when they reveal themselves. She's not a particularly articulate Democratic Socialist. And so she says, should those two things coexist at the same time? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, should successful people and unsuccessful people coexist at the same time? This is like Castro-like speak. And I want to remind you, when Castro was 29, just like she is, he took over Cuba and made it a disaster. And incidentally, I've never seen a dictator like Castro who's poor. Have you? They talk about communism and socialism and, oh, look at the heliport and this and that and the other. None of them are poor. Maduro's worth billions. Chavez before him was worth billions. The Castros are worth billions. This guy Xi in China, anything and everything he wants, he's worth billions. Any form of autocracy, they can call it communism or whatever. And the reason why communism, more than even fascism, certainly in the last half century or so, has more appeal. Because the communists, Marx figured out that you take authority, you centralize government, you create a police state, although they wouldn't admit it, while claiming to do so on behalf of the people. And you create enemies. Like the guy with the helipad, he's an enemy. Well, what if that guy with the helipad was a billionaire who started out in his garage, a scientist who created a life-saving drug, or something you must want, or he wouldn't be a billionaire, she wouldn't be a billionaire. What's wrong with that? Go ahead.
I think a 70% marginal tax rate, especially when we're starting to talk about your $10 millionth, your 10 millionth and $1, all of those.
Your 10 millionth dollar. Well, what if I need $20 million to start a business? What if I need that extra bunch of dollars after my 10 millionth dollar to pay my employees? Or what if I invented something and I want to keep my money because I want to invent other things? What's this magic number? It's like the $15 minimum wage. Where does that come from? Well, it just comes from leftists, and they keep demanding it. They have their catchphrases, their fortune cookies. They have their... Either the 10 millionth dollar, we're just taxing 70% tax rate, and where's the money go? It goes into the massive federal Leviathan slush fund. And where's the constitutional basis for this? Well, there's a progressive income tax. Well, there's also private property rights. Now, also, unintended consequences, unless you actually know what you're talking about, how many people who earn over $10 million, doesn't mean they get to keep it, but earn over $10 million, have small businesses or entrepreneurs or whatever, doesn't matter, say, you know what? I'm giving up. I'm not paying 70 cents out of every dollar after $10 million. Screw it. I'm not hiring any more people. I'm not expanding my business. I'm closing it down. I'm retiring to Florida. Well, that'd happen, you know. Some people are working hard. They're working hard because they want to make money. They want to expand their business. They say, you know what? Forget it. I'm done. I'm done.